Welcome back, my friend. If today has been long, heavy, or filled with too many thoughts, then this quiet moment is for you. Before our story begins, give yourself permission to stop carrying the day. You do not need to solve everything tonight. You do not need to answer every worry. For now, simply let the world slow down. Draw the curtains, turn off the bright lights, or let them fade into a softer glow. Rest your body into the bed, loosen your shoulders, unclench your hands, and let your breathing become gentle. Here, we explore the quiet side of history and science, told slowly, softly, and peacefully, so your mind can drift while your body begins to rest. If this is your first time here, please subscribe and join us for more calming stories made for sleep. Now, close your eyes if you wish, settle into the stillness, and let tonight's story carry you away. Somewhere on the open ocean, long after the ships have vanished, the water still moves the same way it always has. No memory, no trace, just a slow, endless rhythm carrying everything forward until even the loudest stories fade into silence. Now, let the surface of the ocean settle. Let the horizon stretch out in front of you and allow yourself to follow a journey that began not with noise, but with a single ship moving slowly into the unknown in search of something the sea never promised to give. The still ocean before industry. Before the ships came in numbers, before the harpoons were sharpened in rows, before the ocean was mapped into routes and returns, there was only the sea, and it moved slowly, not the kind of movement that calls attention to itself, but something quieter, something patient, a long breath rising and falling beneath the sky. If you had stood on a wooden shore in those early years, on a stretch of sand, untouched by docks or lantern light, you would not have seen much, just water, endless, unbroken water. The horizon would have been soft, almost uncertain, as if the sky and the ocean had not yet decided where one ended and the other began. There were no engines then, no distant hum of machinery, no rhythm except the tide. Waves would arrive the way they always had, unannounced, unhurried, touching the land and slipping away again as if nothing had happened at all. And beneath that surface, far below, where the light could reach, something vast was already there, not restless, not hunting, just moving. Whales. They did not belong to anyone. They were not yet part of trade routes or economies. They were not measured in barrels or profit. They existed the way mountains exist, quietly, completely, without asking to be seen. Sometimes, if you waited long enough, the ocean would reveal them, a slow shadow rising, a breath breaking the surface, a soft, hollow sound like wind passing through a distant cave, and then the mist, a brief white plume that disappeared almost as soon as it formed, leaving behind only ripples and the feeling that something enormous had passed by without disturbing the world at all. There were no crowds to witness it, no voices calling out, no urgency, only the steady rhythm of the sea and the quiet presence of something older than memory. In those days, the people who lived near the ocean did not see it as something to conquer. They watched it, they listened, they learned the way the wind changed before a storm, how the water darkened under certain skies, how silence could stretch longer than expected. Just before something surfaced, the ocean was not empty to them. It was full, just not in ways that could be counted. At night, it became something else entirely. The surface would flatten like a sheet of dark glass, stretching into the distance. Stars would scatter above it, and sometimes, if the water was calm enough, they would scatter below it too. It became difficult to tell where the sky ended and where the sea began, and somewhere in that quiet reflection, whales continued their slow passage. They did not rush. They did not chase. They moved, as if time did not press against them the way it does against everything else. A body the size of a small house, gliding through cold, silent water, with no audience, no witness, no story being told, just movement. Sometimes they traveled alone, sometimes in small groups, spaced far apart, like drifting thoughts that never quite meet. Their world was not the surface. It was deeper, colder, quieter, a place where light fades gradually, not all at once, but in layers, blue becoming darker blue, then something closer to black, and still they moved. No maps guided them, no boundaries stopped them. No one had drawn lines across the ocean yet. There were no names for most of the places they passed, no coordinates, no destinations, only distance, only depth, only the long, continuous rhythm of water pressing gently against everything it touched. And above them, the surface remained calm, occasionally broken by a breath, a fin, a slow turning body that caught the light for a moment before slipping back into shadow. If you were there, truly there, you might not even realize what you had seen. Just a movement, a shape, something that did not stay long enough to be understood. And maybe that was the way it was meant to be, because in that time, before the need for oil, before the hunger for light in distant cities, before ships began to cross the ocean, not for wonder, but for extraction, the sea did not need to explain itself. It simply existed, vast, unclaimed, unhurried, and the whales, those quiet giants beneath the surface, were part of that stillness, not separate from it, not above it, but woven into it, the way a current moves beneath another current, invisible, yet always there. Nothing chased them, nothing followed. The ocean held them the way it held everything else, without urgency, without intention, without end. And so they moved, slowly, endlessly, through a world that had not yet learned how to disturb them, through waters that carried no memory of ships, no echo of iron, no shadow of pursuit, only the deep, steady silence of a planet still breathing in its own rhythm. And if you listen closely, even now, you can almost feel it, that earlier ocean still there, somewhere beneath everything that came after, moving the same way it always has, slow, quiet, and without hurry. The first whalers. Long before the great fleets, before the names of ports were spoken with weight and pride, before the ocean was crossed again and again with purpose, there were only a few small boats. They did not look like much. Wooden, simple, built close to the shore, often by the same hands that would later row them out into the water. Nothing about them suggested distance. Nothing about them suggested power. And yet, they moved slowly, carefully, away from land. The people inside them did not call themselves part of an industry. There was no such word for what they were doing. They were simply men, and sometimes boys, who had learned to read the water. They knew the coast the way one knows a familiar room in the dark, every curve of shoreline, every place where the waves broke differently, every change in the wind that meant something unseen was approaching. They did not go far, not at first. They stayed where land was still visible, a faint line behind them, soft and reassuring, because beyond that was something else, something deeper, something that had not yet been understood. And still, they waited, not with impatience, but with a kind of quiet attention, the kind that stretches time. Hours could pass without a word, oars resting, water gently touching the sides of the boat, the occasional cry of a bird overhead, and then sometimes a sign, not loud, not dramatic, just a small change in the surface, a disturbance, a breath. The men would not shout right away. They would watch, because in those early days, the whale was not something you rushed toward. It was something you approached carefully, as if stepping into a place that did not belong to you. The boat would begin to move again, slowly, guided by quiet hands. No engines, no sudden turns, only the steady dip of oars entering water and leaving it again, closer, always closer. The whale, if it remained near the surface, would not always notice, or perhaps it did, but did not yet see the boat as something worth fearing. There was no long history between them yet, no memory of repeated hunts, no understanding that this small shape above the water carried intention. And so, for a moment, two worlds would exist side by side, above the fragile wooden boat, filled with breath, tension, and quiet focus. Below, a body vast beyond comparison, moving through water as if it were part of it. Then, at some unspoken point, the stillness would change. A signal, a look, a decision made without words, and the moment would arrive. The first hunters did not have perfect tools. What they held in their hands was simple. A harpoon shaped by necessity more than precision, heavy, balanced by feel rather than measurement. It was not thrown in anger, not loudly, but with a kind of quiet resolve, a single motion, breaking the surface of that long, waiting silence. And after that, everything changed, not violently at first, just movement. The whale descending, the rope uncoiling, the boat shifting in response, a tension stretching between two worlds, one above, one below, connected now by something that had not existed moments before. The men did not celebrate. They held on, because this part was uncertain. The ocean, which had seemed so still, began to show another side of itself. The surface no longer smooth, the rhythm no longer predictable. And yet, even then, there was no chaos in the way we might imagine it. Only effort, only endurance, only the quiet understanding that once begun, this moment would carry itself forward until it reached its end. Sometimes that end came slowly. Sometimes it did not come at all. There were days when the whale disappeared into depth and did not return. The rope would slacken, the boat would drift, and the men would sit there, breathing, listening, waiting for something that would not come back. No anger, no shouting, just a quiet acceptance. Because in those early years, the ocean still held the greater authority. Not everything taken could be kept. Not every attempt would succeed. And that was understood when the hunt did end. When the whale no longer moved, there was no celebration in the way later years would know. Only work. Slow, careful work. The body beside the boat, immense and silent now. Too large to fully grasp. Too real to ignore. The men moved with focus, not triumph, because even then, something about the moment remained heavy, not loud, not emotional, just present, as if the ocean itself had noticed. And yet, life continued. The boats returned to shore, not always full, not always empty, carrying with them something more than oil or material. Though those would soon matter more, they carried memory of the distance between human and sea, of the size of what lived beneath them, of the quiet line that had been crossed and would be crossed again. These first whalers did not yet know what their actions would become. They did not see fleets forming on the horizon of time. They did not imagine cities lit by the bodies of whales. They only knew the moment in front of them, the water, the waiting, the approach, and the feeling, hard to name, easy to recognize, that they were stepping into something larger than themselves, something that did not resist loudly, but also did not fully yield. And so they returned again and again, not quickly, not recklessly, but steadily, each journey extending a little farther from shore, each attempt shaping a pattern, until one day, without anyone noticing exactly when, the quiet act of watching the sea became something else, something with direction, something with repetition, something that would, in time, change the ocean's silence into something that remembered being disturbed. The rise of the American whaling fleet. There was no single moment when everything changed, no clear line between the quiet boats near shore and what would come later. Instead, it happened slowly, so slowly that no one noticed it becoming something larger until it already was. The boats grew just a little bigger. The journeys stretched just a little farther, the time away from land just a little longer, and along the northeastern coast of America, in places where the wind carried the scent of salt year-round, small communities began to turn their attention outward, toward the ocean. Places like Nantucket and New Bedford did not begin as centers of anything vast. They were quiet towns, weathered houses, wooden docks that creaked with each tide, simple lives shaped by the rhythm of the sea. But over time, something gathered there, not all at once, not with noise, just a steady accumulation. More ships, more ropes, more barrels stacked along the shoreline. At first, the ships still stayed close, but the ocean had already shown that it did not end where sight failed. And so the ships began to follow what could not be seen outward, past the familiar waters, past the places where the land was still a memory behind them, into distances that had once felt unnecessary. Now, they felt inevitable. The vessels themselves began to change. They were no longer just small boats meant for a single outing. They became something else. Floating homes, strong wooden hulls, built to endure months, sometimes years, without touching land. Inside them, everything was carried. Food that had to last, water stored carefully, tools arranged in tight, efficient spaces, nothing extra, nothing wasted. And yet, even with all this preparation, the ships did not feel heavy. They moved with the wind, with the currents, slowly, Like everything else in this world, when they left port, there was no certainty of return. Families would stand along the docks, not waving with excitement, but watching quietly, because departure in those years was not just leaving, it was entering a stretch of time that could not be predicted. Months would pass without news, seasons would change, and somewhere far beyond the horizon, the ships would continue, day after day. The rhythm of life aboard them was not so different from before. There was still waiting, still silence, still long hours when nothing happened at all. But now the scale had changed. The ocean was no longer something visited briefly. It became a place lived in. The men on board began to know its patterns, not just as observers, but as part of it. They learned the way certain waters felt colder, even without touching them. They noticed how the sky changed differently when far from land, how the stars at night seemed sharper, closer, as if nothing stood between them and the world above. And beneath the ships, whales were still there, moving as they always had, unaware, perhaps, that the number of eyes watching them was slowly increasing. At first, encounters were still rare. A sighting could come after days of nothing, a brief moment, breaking a long stretch of calm. But as the ships spread farther, crossing into new waters, those moments became more frequent, not rushed, not frantic, just more often. And with repetition came familiarity. The process that had once felt uncertain began to take shape, not fully controlled, but understood enough to be repeated again and again and again. Back in the ports, change was visible in quieter ways. Barrels stacked higher, warehouses filled more quickly, ships arriving, then leaving again without long pauses in between. The towns themselves did not become loud. They did not transform overnight into something unrecognizable. But if you stood there long enough, watching over months, over years, you would begin to feel it. A subtle shift, a sense that everything was moving towards something larger. The docks no longer empty between voyages, the sound of tools working wood and rope becoming more constant, and always the ocean just beyond, waiting, not calling, not resisting, simply there. The men who boarded those ships were not all the same. Some came from the towns themselves, others from distant places, drawn by the quiet promise of work. They brought different languages, different stories, but once at sea, those differences softened, because the ocean did not change for anyone. It did not adjust its rhythm. It did not become easier to understand. And so, life aboard the ships settled into something steady. Meals at regular times, watches through the night, the creaking of wood that never quite stopped, and always the waiting. Even as the industry grew, though no one would have called it that yet, the core of it remained unchanged. Stillness interrupted by brief moments of action, silence carrying everything forward. The ships began to reach farther still, across the Atlantic, around the southern tips of continents, into waters that had never seen them before. But wherever they went, they carried the same pattern with them, the same quiet approach, the same slow expansion. And the whales, those deep, moving presences beneath the surface, remained part of that pattern, not altered in themselves, but now encountered more often, observed more closely, followed a little farther than before. It would take time before the full weight of this change was felt, time before the ocean itself seemed different, but already In these early years, something had shifted, not loudly, not all at once, just enough that if you stood on the shore of Nantucket and watched the ships disappear into the horizon, you might notice there were more of them now than there had been before, and that they stayed away just a little longer each time, and that when they returned, they did not bring back stories of a single moment, but of a pattern that had begun to repeat itself across the surface of the ocean. Oil, light, and the world that needed whales. At first, the ocean was only a place, a distance to cross, a surface to watch, a rhythm to follow. But slowly, so slowly, it almost went unnoticed. What came back from the sea began to matter more than the sea itself. Not the stories, not the journeys, but what was carried inside the barrels. Oil. It did not look like much, stored in wooden casks, sealed tight, stacked carefully along the docks of New Bedford and Nantucket. It gave no sign of the distance it had traveled, no sign of the depth it had come from, just liquid, still waiting. And yet, once it left the shore, it changed everything. Because far from the ocean, in cities that never saw waves, in streets that had never felt salt air, darkness had always arrived the same way, quietly, inevitable. The sun would lower, the sky would dim, and the world would soften into shadow. There were candles, of course, small flames, flickering gently, but they were limited, fragile, short-lived. They did not push back the night, they only softened it. And so, for most of human history, evening meant slowing down. Work ended, movement faded, voices lowered. The world rested because it had no other choice until the oil began to arrive. Not all at once, not in great floods, just enough to begin changing the way light behaved. In the dark, when burned, whale oil did something different. It did not flicker as easily. It did not fade as quickly. It produced a steadier glow, a quiet, consistent light that held its place against the night. Lamps were built to contain it. Glass chimneys shaped the flame. Metal frames held it steady. And suddenly, darkness no longer felt absolute. Rooms could stay awake longer. Shops could remain open past the setting of the sun. Streets, once empty and dim, began to carry a different kind of presence. A line of lights stretching into the distance, each one small on its own, but together changing the rhythm of the night. No one described it as a revolution. There were no loud declarations, just a quiet shift, more light for a little longer, and then a little longer still. The demand grew the same way everything else had, not suddenly, not sharply, but steadily, barrel by barrel, lamp by lamp, city by city. People who had never seen the ocean began to depend on what came from it. They did not think about the ships. They did not imagine the distance. They only saw the light, clean, reliable, present. And so they asked for more. Back in the ports, this change was felt in quieter ways. Ships no longer waited long between voyages. The return of one vessel became the preparation of another. Barrels emptied, then filled again. Ropes coiled, then uncoiled. Wood repaired, then sent back into the water. The rhythm of departure and return began to tighten, not rushed, but more frequent. And with that frequency came something new. Expectation, not just of survival, not just of return, but of yield. How much oil? How many barrels? How long Until the next voyage, numbers began to sit quietly beneath the surface of everything, never spoken loudly, but always there. The ocean itself did not change. Its surface still moved the same way. Its depths still held the same silence. The whales still traveled as they always had, slow, steady, unaware of how they were being counted. But the way they were seen, that began to shift, not entirely, not all at once, but enough. They were no longer only a presence. They became a resource, something that could be sought, found, and brought back, measured, stored, used, and far away, in rooms filled with quiet conversation, in narrow streets lined with stone, in houses where windows glowed softly against the night. No one thought about the moment when the oil first left the ocean. They only noticed that darkness no longer arrived the way it used to, that the night felt shorter, that the hours stretched further than they once had. And in that quiet extension of time, something deeper was also changing. The world was learning that the ocean could give not just beauty, not just mystery, but something practical, something useful, something that could be carried far beyond its source and still hold value. And once that idea settles, it rarely fades. The ships continued to leave, the barrels continued to fill, the light continued to spread, and the connection between distant cities and the deep, silent ocean grew stronger, not through understanding, but through need. Still quiet, still gradual, but unmistakable. Because now, when a ship disappeared beyond the horizon, it was not only returning with stories, it was returning with something the world had begun to depend on, something that extended the day, softened the night, and gently reshaped the rhythm of human life, all from a place that had once moved in complete silence, all from a world beneath the surface that had never asked to be part of it, leaving the shore behind. There is a moment just before a ship leaves the harbor when everything feels still, not because nothing is happening, but because everything is about to. The ropes are already loosened. The sails are not yet full. The water moves gently against the hull as if it has always been there, waiting on the docks. People gather, not in crowds, not with loud voices, just enough to fill the space with presence. Some stand close to the edge, watching the ship with quiet attention. Others remain a little farther back, as if distance might soften the feeling of departure. There are no long speeches, no final words carried across the water, only small gestures, a hand raised, a nod, a glance that lingers just a little longer than usual, because everyone understands what this moment means. Once the ship begins to move, it does not come back quickly. Days will stretch into weeks, weeks into months, and somewhere in that long, unmeasured time, the world on land will continue without the people who have just left it on board. The men do not rush. They move with familiarity. Each one knows where to stand, what to hold, what to watch. The ship itself seems to breathe, wood settling, ropes tightening, canvas shifting softly in the early wind. Then, almost without announcement, it begins a slow pull away from the dock. Not sudden, not dramatic, just a gentle separation. The space between wood and land growing inch by inch, water sliding quietly into the gap. And with that, something invisible is crossed. The shore, which felt so close a moment ago, begins to recede. At first, it still holds its shape. Buildings clear, voices faint, but recognizable. Details that feel permanent. But the ship does not stop. It continues forward, guided by wind, by current, by intention. And slowly, the details begin to fade. Edges soften, voices disappear. What was once a place becomes a line. Then a suggestion, then nothing at all. For those on board, this is the true beginning, not the preparation, not the loading of supplies, not the planning, but this quiet moment when land is no longer part of the world around them, only memory. The ocean does not announce their arrival. It does not change color or shift in welcome. It simply continues as it always has, endless, unbroken. The ship moves across its surface, small against the distance. The men settle into their places. Some adjust ropes, some check equipment, some stand still, watching the horizon as if expecting it to change. But it does not. It remains the same, a soft line separating sky and sea, always just out of reach. As the hours pass, the rhythm begins to form, the sound of water against wood, the slow creak of the ship adjusting to motion, the quiet movement of footsteps across the deck. There is no urgency, not yet, only transition. The mind, like the body, takes time to adjust. At first, thoughts remain close to land, to what was left behind. Familiar streets, rooms with walls that do not move, voices that do not fade into distance. But the ocean has a way of softening those edges, not by force, not by erasing them, but by surrounding everything else. Day after day, the same view stretches outward. Water, sky, nothing in between. And slowly, the mind begins to follow that simplicity. Thoughts become quieter, less crowded, more like the sea itself, wide open and without sharp edges. Nights arrive differently here, without the shelter of land. Darkness feels deeper, but also clearer. The sky, unobstructed, fills with stars that seem closer than they should be. The ship moves beneath them, steady and small, and for a moment, everything feels suspended between above and below, between what was left behind and what has not yet been found. There is no rush to reach anything, because out here, there is no visible destination, only direction, only movement. The days settle into a pattern. Watches are kept, meals are shared, tasks repeat themselves in quiet cycles. The body adjusts first, finding balance with the motion, learning the rhythm of the deck. Then the mind follows, letting go of the need for constant change, accepting the sameness of the horizon. And within that sameness, something else appears, a kind of calm, not the calm of stillness, but the calm of continuity, of knowing that the next moment will not be very different from this one, that the ocean will continue as it always has, and the ship will continue across it. Leaving the shore behind is not a single moment. It is a process, a slow unfolding, a quiet drifting away from what is known into something that does not need to be named. And by the time the land is completely gone, not just from sight, but from the immediate sense of being, the journey has already begun. Not with noise, not with certainty, but with a steady unbroken motion into the open water, where everything is simpler and everything feels just a little farther away. The endless waiting. After the shore has disappeared, after the rhythm of the ship has settled into something steady, there comes a stretch of time that feels almost unchanged. Day after day, nothing urgent, nothing sudden, only the quiet continuation of movement across water. This is the part most people never imagine, not the hunt, not the moment of action, but the waiting. It does not begin with a signal. It simply becomes the shape of everything. Morning arrives softly, not with noise, but with a gradual shift in light. The sky brightens, the horizon becomes clearer, and the ocean, which had been dark and endless through the night, returns to its pale, moving surface. The ship continues forward. It does not pause. It does not change direction without reason. It moves the way it always has, steady, unhurried, guided by wind more than intention. On deck, the men take their places. Some stand watch, their eyes scanning the distance, not for something specific, but for anything at all. A change in the water, a line of mist, a movement that does not belong to the surface. But most of the time, there is nothing, only waves, only the same shifting patterns, repeating themselves again and again. The ocean, in these moments, feels almost empty, not because it lacks life, but because that life remains hidden beneath the surface, out of sight. The men know this. They understand that what they are looking for is there somewhere, moving slowly through a world they cannot see. And so they wait, not with impatience, not with frustration, but with a kind of quiet attention that stretches across hours. The ship creaks gently as it moves, wood adjusting to pressure, ropes tightening and relaxing with the wind. These sounds become familiar, constant. They fill the spaces where conversation fades, because there is only so much to say. When nothing changes, meals are taken at regular times, simple food prepared the same way, served in the same places. There is comfort in repetition, a structure that holds the day together. Between these moments, time becomes less distinct. Morning blends into afternoon, afternoon into evening. The sun rises, crosses the sky, and lowers again, and still nothing happens. At first, this kind of stillness feels long, heavy. The mind looks for something to hold on to, a task, a thought, a change in direction. But the ocean offers none of these. It simply continues, and slowly the mind begins to follow. Thoughts become quieter, less urgent. They stretch out like the horizon itself. There is no need to rush them, no need to finish them. They come and go like waves. Some men lean against the rail, watching the water without really watching it. Others sit in small groups, speaking softly or not speaking at all. Silence here is not uncomfortable. It is expected, shared. Even the wind does not always fill the space. There are days when it fades almost completely, leaving the sails to hang in a gentle curve. The ship slows, not stopping, but moving with less certainty. The water becomes smoother, the surface flattening into long, slow swells. And in that near stillness, time stretches even further. The waiting deepens. It is not empty. It is full of small details, the way light reflects differently depending on the angle of the sun, the subtle change in color as the water shifts from blue to gray to something in between, the occasional bird crossing overhead, its path brief and purposeful, gone as quickly as it appeared. These moments do not break the waiting. They are part of it, small variations within a much larger stillness. At night, the waiting continues, but it feels different. The darkness brings a kind of closeness. The horizon disappears. The distance becomes harder to measure. The ship moves through a space that feels both endless and contained. Lantern light glows softly on deck, not bright, just enough to see shapes, to move without stumbling. Beyond that light, there is only shadow, and beneath the surface, something continues to move, unseen, unheard. The men do not speak of it often, but they know, they feel it in the depth of the water, in a way the ocean sometimes seems too large to be empty. And so even in waiting, there is awareness, a quiet understanding that something could appear at any time, not suddenly, not violently, but simply present, a breath, a shape, a disturbance in the pattern of waves. And until that moment comes, the waiting remains unbroken, steady, almost gentle. Days pass this way, then more days, then more. The memory of land grows softer, less immediate, replaced by the constant presence of water and sky. And within that constancy, the waiting no longer feels like something separate. It becomes the journey itself, not a pause between events, not a delay, but the natural state of being at sea, a long, continuous stretch where nothing needs to happen for everything to continue. And somewhere beneath the surface, far below the reach of light, the whales move as they always have, unaware of the eyes above them, unaware of the quiet patient resting on the water's surface. The distance between them remains, for now, held in place by silence, by depth, by time that moves without urgency. And so the ship continues, drifting forward, carrying with it the quiet, endless rhythm of waiting. The sudden hunt. For days, sometimes weeks, nothing changes. The ocean remains wide and quiet. The horizon holds its steady line. The ship moves the way it always has, without urgency, without interruption. And then, of all, something small appears. Not a sound at first, not a shout, just a change, a movement in the distance that does not belong to the rhythm of waves. It is easy to miss a brief rise in the water, a darker shape beneath the surface, or a thin column of mist lifting for a moment, then disappearing. Those who are watching do not react immediately. They look again carefully, because the ocean often plays with the eye. Light shifts, shadows move. Nothing holds its form for long, but this returns. Another breath, another shape, and quietly, almost without breaking the stillness, someone speaks, not loudly, just enough, a single word or a short call that carries across the deck. And in that moment, everything begins to change. Not all at once, not in chaos, but in a quiet shift of attention. Men who had been still begin to move, not quickly, not rushing, but with purpose. Ropes are checked, boats are prepared, hands move to familiar places without needing instruction, because this moment, though rare, is understood. The waiting has ended. The whale does not remain still. It surfaces again, slowly, as it always has. A long, curved back, breaking the water, a breath rising into the air. There is no awareness in its movement of what is watching. No sign of alarm, only the same steady rhythm it has followed for years without interruption. The ship adjusts its course, gently, almost imperceptibly, drawing closer without disturbing the surface too much. The ocean remains quiet, but beneath that quiet, something tightens. Not fear, not noise, just focus. The smaller boats are lowered, wood touching water with a soft, hollow sound. Men step in carefully, finding balance without looking down. The ship stays behind, still watching, and the boats begin to move. Oars dip into the water in slow, controlled motions. No splashing, no wasted movement. Each stroke measured, each sound kept as quiet as possible. The distance closes gradually. The whale continues its path, unaware, or perhaps simply unconcerned. Its body moves through the water with a calm that does not change, a presence too large to feel threatened by something so small. And for a brief moment, the world holds two separate rhythms. Above, the careful, deliberate approach of the boats. Below, the slow, continuous movement of the whale. They exist side by side, close now, closer than they have ever been. The men can see more clearly the texture of the skin, the way the water curves around the body, the rise and fall of each breath. Everything becomes sharper, more defined, and yet no one speaks loudly because sound feels out of place here. The moment carries its own weight. Then, without warning, but also without surprise, the stillness breaks. A single motion, a shift of the body. The whale senses something, not in panic, not violently, just a change in direction, a deeper movement. And at the same time, the men act not in chaos, but in a way that has been repeated enough times to feel almost quiet. A throw, a line released, a connection formed between two worlds that had remained separate until this point. The water responds, not with explosion, but with movement, stronger now, faster. The surface that had been smooth begins to stretch and pull. The boat is no longer drifting. It is carried, not uncontrollably, but with a force that cannot be ignored. The men hold their positions, not shouting, not panicking, because this is the part they have prepared for. The rope tightens, the distance shifts, the whale moves beneath the surface, deeper, then rising again. Its path no longer smooth, its movement no longer detached. And yet, even now, there is no chaos in the way the moment unfolds. Only intensity, a quiet, focused energy that replaces the long stillness of waiting. Time feels different here, shorter, compressed, each second holding more than the hours before it. The ocean, which had seemed endless and calm, now feels closer, more immediate. Every movement visible, every change noticeable. The connection between boat and whale remains taut, unbroken, and gradually, slowly, the motion begins to change again. Not as it was before, but not as intense as the first moment. The strength beneath the surface shifts, softens, the water settles, not completely, but enough. The men adjust, breathing steady, Hands firm, the moment extends until it reaches its quiet conclusion. Not sudden, not dramatic, just a gradual return to stillness. The whale no longer moves as it did before. The surface calms. The rope slackens slightly, and the ocean, as if nothing had happened, begins to smooth itself again. The boats remain where they are, floating, connected to something that has changed the space around them in ways that are not loud but deeply felt. No one celebrates, not yet, because this moment is not separate from what came before it. It is part of the same rhythm, the waiting, the watching, the slow approach, and now this, and soon there will be something else. Work, but for a brief moment, just a small space between action and continuation. Everything becomes quiet again. The ocean returns to its steady motion. The sky remains unchanged, and the boats rest on the surface as if they had always been there. The work after the kill. After the movement fades, after the tension in the rope loosens, after the water settles back into its slow rhythm, there is a moment of stillness. Not the same stillness as before. This one feels heavier. The ocean looks unchanged. The sky remains open and quiet, but something in the space between them has shifted. The whale no longer moves. Its body rests beside the boat, partly beneath the surface, partly held by it, too large to fully see at once, too present to ignore. The men do not speak much. There is no sudden release of energy, no loud voices, only breathing, steady control, as if the work is not yet finished, because it isn't. What follows is not a moment. It is a process, slow, deliberate, carried out with the same quiet focus that guided everything before it. The ship is brought closer, not quickly. It approaches the scene the way it always has, with patience. Wood against water, sails shifting gently in the wind. The smaller boats guide the way, and soon the larger vessel rests nearby, its presence steady, waiting. Ropes are passed, secured. The connection that began in the water is now transferred to the ship. Everything remains calm. No sudden movements, no wasted effort, because the size of what lies beside them demands something different. Not speed, but care. The body of the whale moves slowly with the swell of the sea, rising slightly, then settling again, as if it is still part of the ocean itself. And in a way, it is. The men begin their work, not harshly, not hurriedly, but with practiced motion, each step known, each action repeated many times before. There is a rhythm to it, not unlike the rhythm of the waves. Slow movements, pauses, adjustments. Nothing is forced. Everything follows a sequence that feels almost quiet. From a distance, it would not look like labor, just figures moving along the edge of a ship, leaning, lifting, working in silence. The ocean does not react. It does not change color. It does not grow restless. It continues as it always has. The surface rising and falling beneath everything, and above it, the work continues. Time stretches again, not in waiting this time, but in repetition. One task leading into another, not separate, not rushed, just continuous. The sun moves across the sky, light shifting slowly over wood and water. Shadows lengthen, then soften. The men Pause occasionally, not to stop completely, but to adjust, to breathe, to let the body settle before continuing. There is no urgency because this part cannot be hurried. Everything must be done in its own time. And so the hours pass, quietly, almost unnoticed. The sounds are simple. Rope moving against wood, water brushing the side of the ship, footsteps, measured and steady, voices, when they come, are low, not carrying far, as if the space itself prefers silence. And slowly, what was once a single presence beside the boat begins to change form, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually becoming something that can be carried, stored, used. The barrels that once stood empty now begin to fill, one by one, set in place, sealed, each one holding a part of something that had once moved freely through the depths. There is no reflection spoken aloud, no pause to consider what has changed, because the work itself fills the space where thought might have been. And yet there is a feeling, subtle, unnamed, something that lingers in the quiet between movements. The ocean remains vast, unchanged. The horizon still stretches outward without end, and beneath the surface, life continues. Other whales move through the deep, unaware of what has taken place above, unaware of the ships, the ropes, the slow, steady work. The distance between those worlds still exists, but it feels thinner now, not broken, just closer. As the final tasks are completed, the ship begins to settle back into its rhythm. The ropes are secured, the deck is cleared, the men return to their places, not with celebration, not with noise, but with the same quiet presence they carried into the moment, because for them, this is not an ending. It is part of a cycle, the waiting, the sighting, the approach, the work, and then again, the ocean stretches ahead, unchanged. The wind shifts gently in the sails, and the ship begins to move forward once more, leaving behind a space that looks no different from any other. No mark on the water, no sign of what has passed, only the same slow, endless motion of the sea. And within that motion, the journey continues. Giants beneath the surface. There are things in the ocean that are rarely seen, not because they hide, but because they do not need to appear. Beneath the surface, far below, where light fades into something softer, then disappears entirely, there is a world that moves without witness. And in that world, something vast travels slowly, not with urgency, not with sound, just presence. Whales from above. The ocean can feel empty, a wide, open space where nothing holds its shape for long. But below, it is not empty at all. It is layered. Light fades gradually. Blue becomes deeper blue, then something closer to gray, then something that is not quite color anymore. And in that dim, quiet depth, a shape moves. At first, it is only a shadow, long, heavy, unclear, not because it is distant, but because the water itself softens everything it touches. Edges blur, movement slows, time stretches, and then, slowly, the shape becomes more defined. A body larger than anything that walks on land. A presence that does not rush because nothing in its world requires speed. The whale does not move like a predator. It does not chase in sudden bursts. It does not change direction without reason. It glides as if the ocean itself is carrying it. Its tail moves in slow, powerful motions, not sharp, not frantic, but steady. Each movement enough to send the body forward through water that resists yet yields, and around it, silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of depth. Sound behaves differently here. It travels farther, but softer, more like a vibration than a noise. And sometimes, if you could be there, if you could remain still long enough, you might feel it. A low, distant presence passing through the water. Not loud, not disruptive, just there. The whale does not need light. It moves through layers where the sun does not reach, where the surface feels far away, not in distance, but in meaning. Above, there is wind, weather, change. Below, there is continuity, a world that remains the same from one moment to the next, cold, deep, endless. And within that world, the whale exists as if it has always been there, not visiting, not passing through, belonging. Its size, from the surface, is difficult to understand, even when seen clearly. The mind does not easily accept it. A body that could fill a small space on land moves here without resistance, without effort, because the ocean does not hold weight the way land does. It carries, it supports, and so something immense can move as if it were light. There is no sound of footsteps, no mark left behind, no trail, only motion that disappears as soon as it passes. Sometimes the whale rises, not quickly, not in response to anything urgent, just upward. The water grows lighter around it. The blue softens. The surface begins to take shape above, a shifting line of brightness. And then, for a brief moment, it breaks through. A breath, air entering a body that has moved through silence for long stretches of time. The surface responds, ripples, spreading outward, light reflecting in shifting patterns. Then, just as slowly, the whale descends again, back into depth, back into quiet, back into a world that does not require it to be seen. There are many of them, not gathered, not crowded, spaced apart by distances that feel natural, in a place so large, each one moving through its own path, its own rhythm, occasionally crossing the path of another, not with urgency, but with recognition that does not need to be expressed. They do not call out loudly. They do not need to. Their world is not defined by constant interaction. It is defined by space, by distance, by the quiet understanding that everything exists within a vast, shared environment. Above them, ships move, small, brief, crossing the surface without touching what lies beneath. From below, those ships are only shadows, passing shapes, unclear, unimportant. The whale does not follow them, does not avoid them, because for most of its life, they do not exist in any meaningful way. The depth holds it, the silence surrounds it, and time moves differently here, not measured in hours or days, but in something slower, something continuous. The whale travels through that time without needing to mark it, without needing to remember it, because in the deep ocean, there is no urgency to arrive, only movement, only presence, only the long, steady passage through a world that does not change for those who move within it. And so, beneath the surface, far below the reach of light, the giants continue, unseen, unheard, carrying their quiet existence through the same waters that have always held them, slowly, endlessly, as if nothing above could ever truly disturb them. The sperm whale. Among the many shapes that move beneath the surface, there is one that feels different, not because it moves faster, not because it appears more often, but because of its presence. The sperm whale 5, it does not resemble the others in a simple way. Its head, large, squared, almost too heavy for the rest of its body, leads its movement through the water like something ancient and deliberate. From a distance, it can appear still, a long, dark shape resting just beneath the surface. But when it moves, it does so with a quiet certainty, not sudden, not sharp, just forward. Its skin is marked by lines and scars, not fresh, not loud, but layered over time, as if each journey through the deep has left behind a memory that does not fade. And yet, the whale does not carry these marks as something heavy. They are simply part of it, like the ocean itself, shaped by what has passed, but unchanged in its movement. The sperm whale spends much of its life below the surface, deeper than most, far beyond where light lingers. There are moments when it turns downward, not quickly, but with intention, its body tilting slowly, head descending first, tail rising gently above the water for just a brief second before disappearing. And then it is gone, not lost, not vanished, just below, in a place where darkness is not sudden, but complete, where the water is cold and still, where sound travels in long, low vibrations that feel more like presence than noise. Down there, the sperm whale continues, moving through depths that are difficult to imagine, not rushing, not searching in a frantic way, but navigating a world that has no visible boundaries. It does not rely on sight as the surface does. Instead, it senses a quiet pulse sent outward, returning with subtle changes, distance, shape, movement, all felt without needing light. And in that dark, quiet space, it feeds, not in violence, not in chaos, but in a way that belongs to the deep, slow, measured part of a rhythm that has always existed there. When it rises again, it does so gradually. The depth releases it, layer by layer. Darkness softens, water lightens, and eventually the surface returns. A breath, a sound that is both hollow and full at the same time. A plume of mist lifting into the air at a slight angle, never straight upward, but forward, as if even its breath continues its motion. Then stillness. The whale rests at the surface, not drifting aimlessly, but pausing, floating in a way that feels intentional. Its massive body supported by the water, its presence calm, unconcerned, sometimes alone, sometimes in the quiet company of others. They do not cluster tightly. They remain spaced apart, close enough to sense one another, but not close enough to disturb the stillness. There is no urgency in their gathering, no visible coordination, only a shared rhythm, breathing, resting, then descending again. To those above, to the men on ships who watch from a distance, the sperm whale becomes something more than just a presence. It becomes a focus, a shape recognized, a pattern understood, not completely, but enough, because this whale, with its size, its depth, its slow, deliberate movement, holds something that draws attention, not loudly but steadily. And yet, from the whale's perspective, nothing has changed. The ships that cross above it remain small, temporary shadows that pass and fade. They do not define its movement. They do not alter its path, because the world it belongs to is deeper, slower, less concerned with what happens at the surface. It does not know the stories that will be written about it. It does not recognize the names given to it. It does not carry meaning beyond its own existence. And yet, to those who watch it, to those who follow it, it begins to feel like something more, not just an animal, but a presence, a force, a shape that holds both familiarity and distance. At the same time, the sperm whale moves through the ocean as it always has, unaffected by the attention above, unaffected by the patterns forming around it. It rises, it breathes, it descends again and again, a cycle so steady that it almost disappears into itself. And in that repetition, it becomes something quiet, something constant, something that feels somehow larger than the water it moves through. The silence of the deep. There is a kind of silence that does not feel empty, not the silence of a room with no sound, not the silence that follows after something ends, but a deeper kind, a silence that exists on its own, far below the surface of the ocean, beyond the reach of wind, beyond the shifting patterns of waves. That silence lives. It does not begin suddenly. It arrives slowly as the whale descends. The light fades first, not all at once, but in layers. Blue softens, then deepens, then becomes something closer to shadow, and with each layer, the sounds of the surface begin to disappear. The movement of waves becomes distant. The pull of wind fades until eventually there is only the water. The deep ocean does not feel loud, even when something moves within it. The sound does not carry in the same way. It stretches, it softens, it becomes something felt rather than heard. A low presence passing through the water. The whale exists inside that silence, as if it were part of it, not separate, not breaking it, but moving with it. Its body glides through the dark without resistance, each motion slow, deliberate, almost weightless. There is no echo of footsteps, no sharp edge of sound, only the gentle shift of water around something that belongs there. If you could remain still in that depth, if you could let go of the need to hear clearly, you might begin to notice something else, a different kind of listening, not through the ears, but through presence. The way the water changes slightly as something large passes nearby. The way the space around you feels altered, even when you cannot see why. This is how the deep communicates, quietly, without words, without urgency. The whale senses this world, not by looking, but by feeling. It sends out a soft pulse, not loud, not sharp, and waits. The return is subtle, a faint echo of distance, a suggestion of shape enough to understand what cannot be seen. And then it moves again. There are no boundaries here, no walls, no landmarks to mark direction, only distance, only depth. And yet, the whale does not seem lost. It travels through this vast, silent space with a kind of certainty that does not need explanation, because in the deep ocean, nothing is rushed. There is no sudden change, no interruption that demands attention. Everything unfolds slowly. Even time itself feels different. It does not move in sharp divisions. It stretches. It lingers. Moments are not counted. They are experienced, extended, allowed to exist without needing to end. Within that stretched time, silence becomes something steady, something reliable. It does not shift unexpectedly. It does not break without reason. It remains. The whale moves through that silence again and again, descending, rising, resting, each part of its journey connected by the same quiet thread. Above, the surface continues. Ships pass, waves break, wind changes direction. But none of that reaches here in the same way. The deep holds its own rhythm, separate, unchanged. Even the idea of distance feels different. What would seem far above becomes something else below, a space that is not measured in miles or meters, but in presence, in how long something takes to arrive or to fade. And most of the time, nothing arrives, nothing interrupts, only the whale and the slow, continuous movement of water surrounding it. There are moments, rare, quiet moments, when another presence appears, another whale, not close, not sudden, just there, a shape forming slowly in the dark, moving at its own pace. The two do not rush toward each other. They do not circle or collide. They pass gently, acknowledging each other in a way that does not need sound, a shared understanding within a world that does not require expression. Then distance returns and the silence fills the space again, not as absence, but as something whole, something complete. The deep ocean does not feel lonely. It does not feel empty. It feels continuous, as if everything within it belongs exactly where it is. The whale continues its path, unhurried, unobserved, carried by a silence that does not press against it, but holds it, and far above, beyond layers of fading light, beyond distance that stretches and softens, the surface remains bright, moving, full of sound. But down here, none of that matters. Only the deep, only the quiet, only the slow, steady presence of something that does not need to be heard to exist. When the whale fights back, for a long time, it seemed as if the ocean allowed everything. The ships moved across its surface. The boats approached quietly. The hunts unfolded in slow, practiced rhythms. And most of the time, the balance held. The whale would descend. The line would follow. The moment would stretch and settle into something understood, but not always. There were times, not many, but enough to be remembered, when the pattern shifted, not loudly, not in chaos, just differently. It begins the same way. The sighting, the approach, the quiet closeness between boat and whale. Nothing unusual, nothing that suggests what will follow. The water remains calm, the air steady. The men move with the same careful attention. They have learned to trust. And then something changes, not suddenly, not sharply, but enough. The whale turns, not downward, not away, but with a motion that carries more weight than before. A shift in direction that does not follow the expected path. The rope tightens, faster now, not stretching into the distance, but pulling closer. The boat responds, not by choice, but by connection. The water begins to move differently, not in wide, gentle swells, but in shorter, stronger motions. The surface breaks its usual rhythm, and for the first time, not in noise, but in feeling, the ocean seems less predictable. The whale rises, not slowly this time, not in the steady rhythm of breath, but with force, its body cutting through the surface in a way that sends water outward, not violently, but undeniably. The space around the boat changes. Distance shortens. Everything feels closer, more immediate. The men hold their positions, not because they are unafraid, but because movement here must remain controlled. There is no room for panic, only response. The whale moves again, not in a straight line, not in a pattern that can be followed easily. It turns beneath the surface, a mass of strength, shifting direction in ways the boat cannot match. The rope pull, then loosens, then tightens again. Each change felt instantly, passed from water to wood, from wood to hands. The boat is no longer guiding. It is being guided, carried through motions it did not choose. And yet, even now, there is no chaos in the way the moment unfolds. Only intensity, a deeper kind of movement that replaces the long stillness of waiting. The ocean does not erupt. It does not become something unrecognizable. It simply reveals another layer of itself, a reminder that beneath its calm surface exists something stronger, something not entirely known. The whale dives deep, faster than before. The rope follows, uncoiling in long, controlled line. The boat steadies as best it can. The pull becomes downward, not forward. A tension that stretches into depth. And then, for a brief moment, everything pauses. Not fully, not completely still, but suspended, as if both worlds, above and below, are waiting. Then the movement returns, different again. The whale surfaces at a distance farther than expected, a dark shape rising through water that has already begun to calm. Its breath breaks the air, a mist that lingers slightly longer this time, not as a signal, not as a warning, just present. The line slackens, the tension fades, the connection that had been so immediate softens into something less certain. The boat drifts, the men remain still, watching, because this part, like everything else, cannot be rushed. The whale does not return to the same path. It moves away, not quickly, not an escape, but with a direction that is no longer shared. And slowly, the distance grows. The rope is gathered, coiled again, hands moving carefully, without unnecessary speed. The water returns to its earlier rhythm, waves smoothing themselves as if nothing unusual had occurred. But something has changed, not in the ocean, not in the whale, but in the understanding of those who remain above. A quiet recognition that the balance they move within is not fixed, not guaranteed. That beneath the surface, where depth holds its silence, exists a strength that does not need to announce itself to be real. The men do not speak loudly of these moments. They do not turn them into stories of chaos, because they are not chaotic. They are different, a variation in a pattern that is usually steady. And so the boats return. The ship resumes its course. The waiting begins again. But now, within that waiting, there is a memory, not sharp, not overwhelming, just present, a quiet reminder that the ocean is not something that can be fully known, that the whale, slow, silent, immense, is not only part of the deep, but also capable at times of shaping the surface in ways that cannot be predicted, and after that moment fades, everything becomes still again, as if it had always been that way. A young sailor named Ishmael. There are stories that begin with noise, with events, with urgency, with something already in motion. And then there are stories that begin quietly, so quietly that they almost feel like a thought. Call me Ishmael. There is no explanation at first, no long history, just a name offered simply, as if nothing more is needed. And behind that name, a man who does not fully belong to any one place. He does not begin at sea. He begins on land, in a world that feels too still, too narrow, too familiar. There is a restlessness in him, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet sense that something is missing, that the days repeat themselves without changing, that the rooms he walks through do not lead anywhere new. And so he turns toward the ocean, not because he understands it, not because he has a plan, but because it offers something the land does not. Distance, possibility, a sense that beyond the horizon there is space enough for thought to move freely. He does not rush. He does not declare his departure. He simply goes to New Bedford, then to Nantucket, places where the sea is not just a view, but a direction, where ships arrive and leave without ceremony, where men step aboard, knowing they will not return quickly, and yet do not hesitate. Ishmael watches. He observes the quiet rhythm of these ports, the movement of ropes, the slow loading of barrels, the steady preparation that speaks of long journeys ahead. Nothing about it feels rushed. Nothing about it feels uncertain. It is simply how things are done. And within that quiet order, he finds something that draws him closer. Not excitement, not ambition, but a kind of acceptance. A place where leaving does not require explanation. Before the journey begins, there is another meeting, not planned, not expected, but necessary. A man named Pequod. He is different in appearance, in presence, carrying with him a silence that feels deeper than the one Ishmael knows. At first, there is distance between them, not discomfort, but uncertainty. Two lives that have followed different paths, now sharing the same space, but slowly that distance softens, not through long conversation, not through explanation, but through quiet understanding, a shared stillness, a recognition that neither of them fully belongs to the world they have left behind. And so they move forward together, not as strangers, not quite as friends, but as two people who have chosen the same direction. The ship they join is not described with grandeur. It is simply there, a vessel like many others, wooden, worn, prepared for a journey that will take time to unfold. Its name, the Pequod. It rests at the dock as if it has always been waiting, not for anyone specific, not for any one story, just waiting. Ishmael steps aboard, not with hesitation, but not with certainty either. There is no clear destination in his mind, no defined purpose, only movement, only the beginning of something that has not yet taken shape. The deck beneath his feet feels unfamiliar, the sound of the ocean closer now, not something to look at from a distance, but something to stand within. And as the ship prepares to leave, the same quiet moment returns. seconds. Ropes loosened, sails shifting. The slow separation between land and sea. Ishmael does not look back for long. Not because there is nothing to leave behind, but because what lies ahead holds more weight than what remains. The ship moves gently at first, then steadily, and with that movement, the story begins. Not with action, not with conflict, but with observation, with a voice that does not rush to explain everything. That allows space for the ocean to remain vast, for the journey to unfold slowly, for meaning to arrive in its own time. Ishmael does not claim to understand what he is stepping into. He does not pretend to know the shape of what will come. He simply moves forward, watching, listening, allowing the world around him to reveal itself without forcing it into something clear. And in that quiet beginning, something larger begins to form, not yet visible, not yet defined, but present, like the deep ocean beneath the surface, waiting, patient and already in motion. Captain Ahab and his obsession. There are some presences that do not announce themselves immediately. They are felt first, in small shifts, in quiet changes in the air, long before they are fully seen. On the Pequod, that presence belonged to one man, Captain Ahab. At first, he is not there, not in the open, not among the men who move across the deck in quiet, familiar rhythms. The ships sail, days pass, the ocean stretches outward as it always has, and still Ahab remains unseen. But his absence is not empty. It carries weight. The crew speaks of him rarely, and when they do, their voices remain low, not out of fear, exactly, but out of something quieter, a kind of awareness that his presence, when it arrives, will change the space around it. And then, one day, he appears, not suddenly, not dramatically, just there, standing on the deck, as if he has always belonged to that place, his body still, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the visible horizon. There is something about him that feels anchored, not to the ship, not to the men, but to something else, something farther away, something not yet seen. He does not move like the others. His steps are measured, but heavier, marked by the steady rhythm of something artificial against wood. A leg, not entirely his own, not hidden, not explained, just present as part of him, as everything else. The men do not gather around him. They do not speak to him without reason, because Ahab does not carry the same stillness as the ocean. His stillness feels different, more focused, more narrow, as if all the space around him has been drawn inward toward a single point. He watches the sea, but not in the way others do, not with quiet observation, not with patient attention. He looks through it, past it, as if the surface is not what matters, as if something beneath it, something hidden, is what holds his gaze. And slowly, without declaration, that focus becomes clear. There is a name, Moby-Dick, not spoken often, not repeated loudly, but present, always present. The white whale. For most, it is only a story, a rare sighting, a shape described in passing, something that may or may not be encountered in a lifetime at sea. But for Ahab, it is something else, not a possibility, not a distant idea, but a certainty, something that exists not just in the ocean, but within him. His thoughts do not wander. They do not stretch across the wide, open space the way Ishmael's do. They return again and again to the same point, the same direction, the same unseen presence beneath the surface of the sea. There is no need for him to explain it, no long speech to define what it means, because it is already visible in the way he stands, in the way he looks, in the way the air around him feels slightly tighter than it did before. The journey of the Pequod begins to shift, not in speed, not in path, at least not yet, but in intention. The ocean remains vast, unchanged. The rhythm of the ship continues as it always has, but beneath that rhythm, something else has been set in motion, not loudly, not openly, but steadily. Ahab does not rush. He does not command constant action. He allows the days to pass, the waiting to continue. But within that waiting, his focus does not soften. It does not expand. It remains fixed, like a point on the horizon that cannot be reached, but also cannot be ignored. And those around him begin to feel it, not as pressure, not as fear, but as direction, a quiet understanding that this voyage, though it looks like any other, is not the same, because somewhere far beyond sight, there is something that one man is not willing to let remain unseen. And in that quiet, steady obsession, the open ocean begins to feel just a little narrower, not in space, but in purpose, as if all its vastness is slowly being drawn toward a single encounter that has not yet arrived, but is already shaping everything that moves toward it. The white whale. There are some things that exist in the world, and then there are things that exist in the mind. Most of the time, they remain separate, clear, defined, but sometimes, slowly, almost unnoticed, the line between them begins to blur, and something that was once only a creature becomes something more. The white whale, Moby-Dick. At first, it is only a description, a whale larger than most, marked by a pale, almost unnatural whiteness, seen rarely, spoken of quietly, a shape that appears and disappears again before it can be fully understood. There is no single account, no exact measure, only fragments, stories told from ship to ship, each one slightly different, each one carrying a tone that is difficult to name, not fear, not awe, something in between, because the whiteness of the whale does not behave like other colors. It does not blend. It does not soften. It stands apart, visible even when the light is low, clear even against the shifting patterns of the sea. And in that clarity, something unsettling begins to form, not because it moves violently, not because it acts differently, but because it does not easily disappear into the background of the ocean. It remains in sight, in memory, in thought to those who encounter it. The white whale does not feel like a passing presence. It lingers, not physically, but inwardly, as if the moment of seeing it does not end when the water closes over its back. And so the stories continue, not told loudly, not repeated for effect, but carried quietly from one voyage to another. Some speak of its size, some of its strength. Others say very little at all, because the experience itself resists simple explanation, and slowly what began as an animal becomes something else, not in the ocean, but in the way it is perceived. For Captain Ahab, that transformation is complete. The whale is no longer just a creature moving through water. It becomes a point of focus so strong that everything else begins to fade around it. not intentionally, not by force, but by the nature of attention itself. What we return to often becomes larger. What we hold in place begins to shape the space around it. And for Ahab, the white whale is no longer distant. Even when unseen, it is present in thought, in direction, in the quiet tension that moves beneath each day at sea. The crew senses it, not as a clear understanding, but as a shift, a narrowing. The vast ocean, once open and without center, now feels as if it has one. Somewhere out there, a single point drawing everything toward it. And yet the whale itself remains unchanged. It does not know the stories. It does not carry the weight of meaning that has been placed upon it. It moves as it always has, rising to breathe, descending into depth, crossing distances that have no boundaries. Its whiteness does not signal intention. It does not announce purpose. It simply is a color that reflects light differently, a body that moves through water without altering its nature. And still, to those who watch from above, it feels like more, because the ocean, in all its vastness, rarely offers something that can be recognized so clearly. Most things remain hidden, unseen, uncertain, but the white whale, when it appears, is unmistakable. And in that clarity, the mind begins to hold on to it, to return to it, to shape it into something that feels larger than its form, not because it demands it, but because it allows it. And so the whale becomes a symbol, not spoken as such, not defined, but felt, a presence that carries whatever is placed upon it. Fear, focus, meaning, all of it resting on something that continues to move through the ocean without awareness. The Pequod sails on. The days pass. The sea remains unchanged. But within the space of the journey, the white whale is already there, not in sight, but in direction, in the quiet pull that guides the ship forward, even when nothing can be seen ahead. And in that quiet pull, the story deepens, not through action, not through encounter, but through presence, the kind that does not need to appear to be felt, the kind that remains just beyond reach, and in doing so becomes impossible to ignore. The long chase across the ocean. Once a direction is chosen, truly chosen, the journey begins to change, not in speed, not in distance, but in meaning. For the Pequod, the ocean is no longer just a place to move through. It becomes something else, a path, a long, quiet line stretching forward towards something not yet seen, but already present in every thought. 6. The days continue, as they always have. The ship rises and falls with the water. The sails shift with the wind. Morning becomes afternoon. Afternoon becomes evening. Nothing in the surface world suggests urgency, and yet beneath that calm, something is pulling everything forward, not quickly, not forcefully, but steadily. The chase does not feel like pursuit at first. There is no visible target, no clear movement to follow, only direction, a sense that somewhere ahead, beyond the horizon, that never changes, there is something waiting. The crew moves through their tasks. Ropes are handled, sails adjusted. The rhythm of the ship continues, but within that rhythm, there is a difference. Subtle, difficult to name. The waiting is no longer empty. It carries intention. Each sighting of a whale, any whale, becomes a moment of attention. Not all are followed. Not all are pursued, because the ship is not searching for just anything, it is searching for one. And that difference, quiet as it is, changes everything. The ocean remains vast, unbroken, endless in every direction. But the mind does not move across it the way it once did. It narrows, not by force, but by focus. All that space, all that distance begins to feel as if it is leading toward a single point. The Pequod crosses waters that have no name, passes through regions where the sky looks the same. From one day to the next, there are moments when nothing happens at all. Long stretches of time where the ship moves forward without interruption. And in those moments, the chase feels almost like a dream, something that exists not in what is seen, but in what is expected. The crew senses it, not as excitement, not as fear, but as presence, a quiet tension that does not fade with time, because the longer the journey continues, the more certain it feels that it is leading somewhere. And at the center of that certainty, Captain Ahab, he does not change his pace. He does not rush the ship forward beyond what the wind allows, but his focus remains unbroken. Days pass, then more days, and still his attention does not shift. It does not wander. It does not soften. It holds like a line drawn across the surface of the ocean, invisible but impossible to ignore. The sea itself begins to feel different, not in its movement, not in its appearance, but in how it is experienced. Each horizon crossed does not feel like an ending, but a continuation. Each new stretch of water feels less like discovery and more like approach, as if everything is gradually narrowing towards something that cannot yet be seen. Storms come, not violent in the way they might seem in stories, but present. Winds shifting, clouds gathering, the surface of the ocean lifting and falling with greater force. The ship responds, adjusting, enduring, continuing, because nothing, not weather, not distance, alters the direction that has been set. And when the storm passes, the ocean returns to its calm, as if nothing had happened. The chase continues, quietly, relentlessly, without needing to be spoken aloud. There are moments, rare brief moments, when something appears in the distance, a shape, a movement, a breath, breaking the surface. And in those moments, everything sharpens. Attention narrows completely. The world reduces to a single point on the water. But just as often, that point fades, disappears, leaving behind only the same wide, open sea. And yet, the direction does not change, because the chase is no longer dependent on what is seen. It exists whether the whale appears or not. It has become part of the journey itself, a current beneath the surface, guiding, pulling, a moth shaping everything that moves above it. The Pequod sails on, day after day, across distances that blur together, through waters that look the same no matter how far they travel. And still the chase continues, not as a sudden pursuit, not as a moment of action, but as something slower, something deeper, a quiet, unbroken line stretching across the ocean toward a meeting that has not yet arrived, but is already shaping every step that leads to it. The final confrontation. There comes a point in every long journey when the movement forward can no longer remain open, when direction, quiet, steady, unbroken, finally gathers into a single moment. For the Pequod, that moment does not arrive suddenly. It approaches the way everything else has. Slowly. At first, it is only a sign, a disturbance in the distance, a breath rising from the water, faint but unmistakable, the kind of movement that has been seen before and yet feels different now. Not because it is larger, not because it is closer, but because of what it carries. Recognition. The men do not speak loudly. They do not rush, but something within them sharpens quietly. The long chase, the endless horizon, the steady pull of direction, all of it begins to narrow into this one space. And there, Moby-Dick, not imagined, not distant, but present. The whale moves through the water as it always has, unhurried, unchanged, its pale body visible beneath the surface, not fully clear, but enough to hold the gaze, enough to anchor everything that has led to this moment. The ocean remains calm, no storm, no sudden shift in the sky, only the same wide, open stillness that has carried the ship this far, and within that stillness, the encounter begins. The boats are lowered, not quickly, not with chaos, but with the same measured motion that has defined every hunt before. Wood touches water, oars settle into place. The men move forward, slowly, carefully, because even now, even at the edge of what has been pursued for so long, the rhythm does not break. It deepens. The distance closes, not dramatically, just enough. The whale surfaces, a breath, a plume of mist rising into the air, angled slightly forward, as it always has been. And for a moment, everything becomes still, not empty, not silent in absence, but full, as if the ocean itself is holding its breath. The connection forms again, a line cast, a tension drawn between what moves above and what moves below. But this time, it does not feel the same. The whale does not follow the familiar pattern. It does not descend in quiet acceptance. It turns, not sharply, not violently, but with a presence that fills the space around it. The water responds, not with chaos, but with movement that carries weight. The boats shift, the line tightens, and for the first time, the direction is no longer one-sided. The whale does not simply move away, it moves through the space of the boats, through the surface that once felt separate, a presence that cannot be held in the same way as before. The ocean changes, not in form, but in feeling. The calm remains, but it carries something else now, something deeper, something that does not yield. The men hold their positions, not shouting, not breaking the stillness, because the moment has moved beyond control, beyond repetition. This is not the hunt as it has been known. This is something else, a meeting, not between hunter and hunted, but between two forces that have been moving toward each other for a long time. Captain Ahab stands at the center of it, not rushing, not stepping back. His focus, unchanged from the beginning, now meets what it has been fixed upon. There is no need for words, no need for command, because everything has already been set in motion. The whale moves again, closer, then deeper, then rising once more, each movement reshaping the space between it and the boats. The line stretches, pulls, shifts, and with each shift, the distance between control and surrender becomes harder to define. The ocean holds them all, ship, boats, whale, not choosing a side, not altering its rhythm, only carrying the moment forward. As it unfolds, time feels different here. Not stretched, not compressed, but suspended. Each second holding weight, each movement echoing something that has been building for far too long to remain quiet. And yet, the scene is not loud, not chaotic. It remains focused, centered, as if everything unnecessary has fallen away, leaving only this: the whale, the boats, the line between them, and a quiet understanding that this moment, once reached, cannot be undone. The surface shifts again, water rising, then settling. The connection holds, then strains. And within that tension, the final confrontation continues to unfold, not as an explosion, not as a sudden ending, but as something slower, something inevitable, something that has been present from the very first moment the journey began, now fully visible in the open space of the sea. The survivor. After everything has moved, after the lines have tightened and broken, after the ocean has carried the moment to its quiet, irreversible end, there is a space that follows. Not silence as absence, but silence as aftermath. The sea remains as it always has, its surface rising and falling with the same slow rhythm. No mark, no boundary, no visible trace of what has just taken place. Only water, only distance, only the long, steady motion that does not change. And within that motion, something small remains. Ishmael, not standing, not moving with intention, but floating, carried, supported by something simple, a fragment, a piece of what once belonged to the ship. Not strong, not secure, but enough. Enough to keep him above the surface, enough to hold him between what has ended and what has not yet begun. He does not speak. There is no one to hear. The ocean stretches in every direction, unbroken, indifferent, unchanged. And yet, for the first time, it feels different, not in form, but in presence. The vastness that once felt open now feels quiet in another way, not empty, but aware, as if everything that has happened has settled into it, not visibly, but completely. Ishmael drifts, not guiding his movement, not choosing direction. The currents decide, the water carries. The sky above shifts slowly from one color to another. Time returns, but not in the same way. Moments are no longer measured by tasks, by watches, by the rhythm of a ship. They pass one into the next without interruption, without structure, only the slow unfolding of light and shadow. He breathes, steady, quiet, because there is nothing else to do, no rope to hold, no command to follow, only presence, only being. The memory of what has happened does not arrive all at once. It does not rush in. It comes slowly, like the tide. Pieces, images, not sharp, not overwhelming, just present. The ship, the movement, the final moment that cannot be reversed. All of it now part of something that has already passed, and the ocean which held that moment now holds him in the same way, without preference, without judgment, just carrying. The sky clears, clouds drifting apart in long, quiet lines. The light softens, and the surface of the water begins to reflect it again, as if nothing had ever disturbed it. The world continues, not paused, not altered in its rhythm, only continuing. And within that continuation, one life remains, not by force, not by control, but by chance, by position, by the quiet alignment of something that allowed him to stay above the surface when everything else did not. There is no triumph in it, no sense of victory, only survival. Simple, unadorned. He floats, the hours pass, the distance remains, and somewhere far beyond what he can see, another ship will arrive. Not called, not expected, but present as all things eventually are in a world that continues to move. Until then, there is only this: the open sea, the quiet sky, the slow rise and fall of water, and a single figure resting within it, carried forward not by intention, but by the same steady motion that has always defined the ocean itself. The decline of whaling. For a long time, it seemed as if the pattern would continue. Ships leaving, ships returning, barrels filled, then emptied, then filled again. The rhythm had settled into something steady, something dependable, not rushed, not questioned, just continued. The ocean remained the same. The whales still moved beneath the surface in their slow, unbroken paths. The ships still followed, not always finding what they sought, but returning often enough to keep the pattern alive. And on land, the light continued to burn, lamps glowing in windows, streets holding a soft, steady brightness. Long after the sun had gone, the connection seemed complete. Ocean to ship, ship to shore, shore to city. A quiet system moving without interruption. But somewhere far from the sea, something else had already begun. Not loudly, not with immediate change, just a different kind of discovery. Oil. Wheel, not drawn from living movement beneath the ocean, but from the ground itself, deep, hidden, still. At first, it did not replace anything. It did not arrive as a solution, only as an alternative, another way to produce the same quiet light. And so, for a time, both existed, side by side. The ships continued to sail, the barrels continued to fill, and on land, a second source began to grow. Slowly, almost unnoticed. The change did not happen in a single moment. No ship returned to find the docks empty. No city suddenly turned dark. Instead, the need shifted. Gradually, the demand softened, not disappeared, just lessened. Barrels that once moved quickly began to wait a little longer. Ships that once departed without pause remained at harbor just a little more often. The rhythm stretched, not broken, but altered. In places like Nantucket and New Bedford, the change could be felt before it was understood. The docks grew quieter, not empty, but less constant. The sound of preparation, the steady movement of loading and repair began to space itself out. Gaps appeared, small at first, then wider. The men who had once sailed began to remain on land longer. Some left the sea entirely, not because they chose to abandon it, but because it no longer called. In the same way, the ocean did not change. It did not grow distant. It remained where it had always been, but the pull toward it softened, and the ships, those long wooden vessels that had crossed the world's waters, began to rest. At first, temporarily, then for longer stretches, wood weathering slowly under open sky, ropes no longer drawn tight, sails folded and left untouched. They did not vanish. They remained, but their purpose began to fade. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just less often needed. And the whales continued, unaware, unchanged, moving through the same depths with the same slow rhythm. Their world did not shift with the one above. They rose, they breathed, they descended again and again, as if nothing had altered. And in a way, nothing had, because the ocean does not hold memory the way people do. It does not measure time by what has ended. It simply continues. The decline of whaling was not an ending, not in the sense of something breaking. It was a quiet transition, a gradual release of something that had once felt essential. The light remained, but it no longer depended on the same source. The ships remained, but they no longer needed to travel as far. The ocean remained as it always had, vast, open, unclaimed, and slowly the connection that had once defined an entire way of life began to loosen, not cut, not removed, just less present, until one day, without a clear moment to mark it, the pattern that had repeated for so long became something else, a memory carried not by the ocean, but by those who had once crossed it in search of something the world no longer needed. In the same way, what remains in the ocean after everything has passed, after the ships have slowed, after the docks have quieted, after the light has found another source, there is something that does not change. The ocean remains. It does not hold on to what has happened. It does not mark the places where ships once gathered or where moments unfolded. There are no lines on its surface, no traces left behind, only water moving as it always has, rising, falling, continuing. The horizon remains unchanged, that soft line where sky meets sea, always just out of reach, no closer now than it was before, no farther, just there. And beneath that surface, life continues. The whales still move through the deep, slowly, silently, unaffected by the stories that have been told about them, unaffected by the time that has passed above. They rise, they breathe, they descend, the same rhythm that existed before the first ship ever left the shore. Nothing in their movement suggests that anything was ever different, because in their world, nothing was taken away, nothing was replaced. Only time passed, and the ocean carried it forward. There is a quiet here that feels familiar, not empty, not distant, but complete, a stillness that does not depend on what came before, that does not require memory to remain. The surface reflects the sky again, clouds drifting slowly across it, light shifting gently from one tone to another, day becoming evening, evening becoming night, and then morning again. The cycle continues without interruption. Ships still cross the ocean, but they move differently now, faster, more direct, leaving behind less of themselves in the process. They do not linger, they do not wait, they pass, and the water closes behind them as if they had never been there. The old paths are gone, not erased, but no longer followed. The routes that once stretched across the world exist now only in memory, carried in stories, in quiet recollections of journeys that took time to unfold. But the ocean does not hold those paths. It does not repeat them. It simply remains. There are moments, rare, quiet moments, when everything feels the same as it once did. A calm day, a soft horizon, a distant shape rising briefly from the surface. A whale seen only for a moment, then gone again. No urgency, no pursuit, just presence. And in that brief appearance, something familiar returns. Not the past itself, but the feeling of it, the sense that beneath everything that has changed, something deeper has remained untouched. The ocean does not belong to what has happened upon it. It does not carry forward the intentions of those who crossed it. It holds only what continues. Water, depth, movement, and within that, a quiet constancy, something that does not need to be remembered to exist because it has never left. And so, at the end of everything, there is no final mark, no closing line drawn across the sea, only the same wide open surface stretching outward as it always has, and beneath it the slow, endless movement of a world that continues without hurry,